Where today, of course, in the studios there, they are interviewing Cyprian Nyamwamu. He is the director of Future of Kenya Foundation, and they're discussing citizens' position on the Azimio Kenya Kwanza talks. So we'll listen in to that conversation.
NairobiMarathon.com with 2,000 shillings register for this year's event. It's going to be on Sunday, the 29th of October in Nairobi and in several parts of the country, several towns and cities. And then globally, the virtual run will be in the week leading to the 29th of October. Again, NairobiMarathon.com. 2,000 shillings. We are still seeing headlines about talks. Ruto maintains tough conditions ahead of talks. President yesterday said he's ready for dialogue with the opposition, but he will not be blackmailed using violence, and that power sharing is off the table, as his henchmen also ruled out talks on cost of living. This is what we're hearing from the top political leadership in the country, from both sides. What do the people want? The citizens themselves. Cyprian Nyamwamu is the director, Future of Kenya Foundation. He's our next guest. Good morning, Cyprian.
Good morning, Eric. Good morning, Du. Happy to be here this morning again.
Karibu sana. The hot seat of the Situation Room. We want to have a conversation. What do the citizens want ahead of these Kenya Kwanza Azimio talks, ahead of our national talks? That's the conversation we'll be having. To welcome you, let me give you the day's proverb. Acting on behalf of CT Muga, the proverbs are from West Africa, those countries, Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso.
Where there's a lot of action.
Where there's a lot of action. And the proverb today is, salt cannot glorify itself in the sauce. Salt cannot glorify or praise itself in the sauce. What's your interpretation of it?
So it can glorify itself where? However, I think it's when you reflect on salt glorifying itself, it's about where a human being can praise himself or herself. It has to be a way, or it has to be in a context where it is appreciating its source, that I came from this people, this ethnic community, this nation, or more importantly, to acknowledge, like if you are in power, that your source of power is part of the donation from the sovereign. So that is what I take from that.
But source here, by the way, I meant S-A-U-C-E. Not S-O-U-R.
Yes.
C-E.
C-E as well. Yeah. Yeah, it's because I think then, because the source can yes, because it dissolves there, and it is part of the source. So you should act as part of the community, as part of the commonwealth, as part of the collective beauty of a people or of a community or of a work team.
No matter your talent.
No matter your talent. Yes.
Interesting.
You are only a contributor to the collective commonwealth.
That's a good one. That's a good view of it. So we've been seeing this conversation about, talks, dialogue. What's your view of it? First of all, by the political leadership saying, okay, let's have dialogue. What do you make of that?
They haven't said that they want to have dialogue at all. They have never said that.
What have they said?
The first time President Ruto suggested the need for bipartisan talks was on Palm Sunday, April the 9th, this year. And it was after the series of demonstrations of Maandamano. So it is not that he wanted talks. He wanted to see what he can do to get the demonstrations off the street, because they were affecting the economy, and the government had quantified it at about 3 billion shillings a day. In an economy like this, the president was acting in self-preservation. He didn't intend that there be talks, and the talks collapsed, as you saw. After the latest installment of Maandamano that Azimio called the third wave, it became painful because more than 34 people lost their lives, police officers, many injuries, ethnic clashes were out there, the economy was tanking. And I think that is why it was suggested that there is need for some form of talks to try and cool down the pressure. So it is not the political class that has said they want talks. Even as late as yesterday, the president's side, Kenya Kwanza, is saying they will not go to the talks under conditions, they will not be pressured, they will not discuss certain things. So you can already see that those are talks that are perished, that are doomed. They may not even take off to begin with.
But they have said that they want talks. Because you started by premising this and saying that they have not said they want talks. They have called for
They have been forced by conditions to hold talks, which they have not even agreed what kind of talks they are going to have. The first meeting is tomorrow at Bomas of Kenya by the teams that have been selected by both sides of the political divide. But this morning, what I think is important is to say that these are what we call the intra-elite negotiations. They are not talks about Kenya. They are not talks about the real issues that should be on the table. And the rest of the sectors, which are not in parliament, have been having a conversation since 2017 about what this country requires if we are going to avoid these clashes at every election and these clashes that follow every election. And the government side, whether it was under Uhuru or Raila or anybody else, don't want structured talks that are inclusive, that follow the principles of genuine dialogue. In fact, they have said they don't want dialogue. What they want is some conversation, some talk, some negotiations. So the vision that the people of Kenya have is not in agreement with the idea that the political class has.
Can we get from your point of view?
Yes.
What is this vision that Kenya has? And I'm going to maybe just add a little bit of meat to that question.
Yeah.
Is that I am of the belief that if a citizenry, it doesn't matter where on the planet they are domiciled, a citizenry who for certain things are met, they actually really don't bother with what government does. Look at the United States, look at the UK, look at Singapore, look at China. Once certain things are sorted out for you, you really leave the business of governance to those who have either asked you to give it to them by way of election or those who've gotten it by appointment. The problem comes about when those things are not being met. That's the way I see it. And we can see that if you look at Social Security being set up in the United States, for example, people's daily needs are met. Do whatever you want in the White House, essentially. From where you sit, what is it that Kenyans want? And have they even said, wait a minute, in all of this, can we be part of the conversation?
Kenyans have been very clear from 2017 at least. I can give a very good account of the position that Kenyans have taken through their, I can account for about 9 sectors. I'm talking about KEPSA and the private sector broadly through what they call Mkenya Daima. I'm talking about the religious leadership through what they call the Dialogue Reference Group. I'm talking about civil society through their structured engagement. I'm talking about students and the youth movement. They have what we call the National Youth Serving Organizations. If the women's movement under their National Steering Committee, if I can talk about those 9 sectors that I have, the trade unions that were on the streets, a month and a half ago, they have a very clear understanding of the kind of national dialogue that they want. And they are saying that you have to go back to 2008 to read the report of Kofi Annan in what we call Agenda 4 items. What has happened for the last 60 years since we got our independence is that there are issues that the political class has ensured will never be discussed conclusively. They have been listed in all reports, but they will not be discussed. They will not be discussed because the people in power are accused to be the architects of the problems. So if you go to the Kofi Annan Agenda 4 issues, for example, land reform, historical injustices, regional imbalances, ethnic animosity, etc., those issues the current leadership, whether they are in the opposition or they are in government, generally do not want a national conversation about those issues. So they create very limited number of pressing issues like constituting IBC and a little other things. And they say, this is what we all need. Once we discuss this, we are okay. So you see, when they agreed under the former president of Nigeria, Olusegun Obasanjo, the government side said, you must drop the cost of living from that list. Because that's a policy issue and we'll deal with it at the ministries. And it's clear that the Azimio side dropped the issue, except that when they came out to speak to the public, the backlash was so big, they started issuing statements and saying, no, we need to revise this list and put cost of living on it. They were not intending to discuss it.
So again, is there any way that we can concretize and say that this is what the citizens want?
Yeah.
Oh, yes. The 10 issues that have been framed by those 9 sectors are widely circulated. In fact, there's a letter that I know.
But those sectors have not sat together.
They have sat.
Have they?
Last 2 weeks ago at Fungamano, the 9 sectors met under the aegis of what we call the National Dialogue Forum. And they published a list of 10 issues that they want settled once and for all at a State of the Nation convention, where they say government must be invited, the opposition must be a participant, but they must be participants like all of us. The question that the private sector, for example, asked at Fungamano on that day is this: if Azimio and Kenya Kwanza meet to talk about the economy and the cost of living, what are they going to submit there? Azimio will be giving whose views at that particular meeting. The private sector needs to come there and say the cost of energy, the cost of money, interest rates, and the following things are the ones that are making the economy not to grow. That's why we are retrenching people. So you cannot talk about 2 political sides who are squibbling over how IBC is supposed to be formed, as if IBC is not a referee for the people of Kenya.
Yeah.
They make IBC look like a referee for the 2 of them.
Yeah.
That's the problem with the construction of all these talks that are going on. The Kenyans let them have those talks sometimes, because even if limited as they are, but now after 60 years, it is clear that these guys will never discuss anything that is going to solve the problem, the fundamental socioeconomic and political problems of our country. That's why the list of 10 issues is very clear, and we are saying we are not hoping for any charity or
goodwill
or contribution or mercy from somebody, whether it is in government or in the. We are saying this is our country, Article 1 of our Constitution gives us sovereign power. We can exercise it through elected representatives, or we can exercise it directly, so that we give our country the direction we want to give it.
Cyprian, I think this is all, all of this came from somewhere, and maybe we can take a step back and ask then the question, what is the problem? Because usually, when we talk about there are talks, and they've come about as a result of something having gone wrong, isn't it?
Yeah.
When you call the village elders will now, mediate between this side, and then what happened? What is the issue here? Because suddenly everybody wants to talk, isn't it? We're saying Kenya has issues, but all of this, suddenly we realize that this conversation needed to happen after the election of 2022.
No, the elections need to have happened at least in 2017.
No. These two sides that are talking today,
yes,
they would not be in the same conversation void of the election that happened in 2022. An election happened in 2022. Somebody was not happy with the results, right? We are having bipartisan talks today, and the reasons have morphed from one to another. It was essentially IEBC must open the service. It then became that we must have a conversation about the cost of living. All of this stemming from the election of 2022. I can agree that there were deep-seated issues before that, of those that you have mentioned now, Agenda 4, and I said all of those have been historical. They've been there from one administration to the next. But in this conversation that we're having today,
yes,
what's the problem?
There are two types of talks, and I want to answer the question very specifically. They are what we call intra-elite talks, which are normally for the elite, whether they're in the opposition, to agree on how to accommodate each other. Because elections are expensive, and if you are Raila, for example, and you've run 3 elections, presidential elections, without being in government, the other side has an advantage over you, over money, structure, and everything else. So you are feeling the pressure. There are no more donors coming forward to fund your elections. And so intra-elite talks have their place in our country. And they cannot happen unless the opposition raises the ante, which is to say the elections were rigged, we have evidence, you are in office illegitimately, and we want the servers opened, and we want all that. You understand? The Supreme Court didn't determine the matters based on law and facts, and IBC was compromised and it was captured and whatnot. All those issues. Those are the issues we say the chips. You have to raise the stakes if the talks are going to happen.
Right.
Once the talks are opened, the discussion, I can tell you, I'm privy to a lot of information there. People are saying, how do we divide the 7 commissioners? Who gets the 3 and who gets the other ones? How do we get the chairman? And that kind of thing. That's why I was asking the question. So, this referee is for MPs, is for political parties.
Exactly. So then the question...
So that is why those talks are actually against the broad, long-term interests of our country. We are actually saying that the problem has never been IBC in elections in this country.
Never.
It has never been. The problem in our country is the choice of the presidential system of government and the choice of an electoral system that we call the winner takes it all, first past the post. So our structural problems cannot be solved by sharing IBC commissioners.
So these talks that we have today,
yes,
we can solidly say has absolutely nothing to do with Kenyans and their desires.
They have nothing to do with Kenyans and their desires. And you look at the list of the things that have been presented there, there are issues there. For example, the poaching of members of parliament from the opposition, grabbing Jubilee from Azimio, and those are all legitimate, multi-party democracy concerns, right? But we are saying that we have fundamental constitutional issues about our country that will never be allowed to be discussed on that table. It's only us, the people of Kenya, who can discuss and agree and compel government to take action on those issues. Let me just give you an example. More than 34 people have been killed by the police. Why were they killed? Who killed them? People were pulled out of their houses and killed and maimed. Why is that happening? Why is state terrorism happening in a country that is at peace? Why is this being done? That level of human rights violations cannot be left to politicians to talk about. We must open the conversation so that Kenyans ask themselves, is this how we want to live? So that when we come from a certain community and we have not agreed with your government, we didn't vote for you, you can send people to come and pull us out of our houses and kill us? We can't live like that. That is not the Kenya that we established in 2010 under the Constitution of Kenya. I'm just giving you some of the issues that are never going to be on that table.